All the fun, all the fun. Well, it's good to get to spend the morning with you. And one of the things I love about that song, no power of hell, no scheme of man can ever take me from his hand. The power of God is greater than anything this world has to offer. We're just having a party. Hey, have you ever felt like you needed a do-over with something? Anybody ever needed a do-over before? Anybody going to lean hard into lying the entire service? You're not going to... do-overs are just kind of spread throughout the life that we live. They're found in everything. We run into needing do-overs in sports sometimes. I played tennis in high school, a little bit in college. If the ball hits the net and goes into the right service box, you get a do-over. You get a let. Sometimes you might find yourself needing a do-over in school. I know I needed do-overs in school. My wife didn't need do-overs in school. So back in the day, before there were you took class before there were online classes, you would, if you took like a distance learning class, they would actually send you all the information. You would have to go through it by book. You'd have to mail stuff back, and then you'd sit down and have your exams proctored and your final exam proctored. I took one class when I was in college. I didn't need to take the final exam because there was no hope. And I got to do over that class. Maybe your own work environment, sometimes you feel like a do-over. Even as a parent, sometimes you feel like you need a do-over. That or you list your kids for sale on eBay. Don't do that. That's not legal. Every time I try to fix something at my house, I get to do a do-over. Or I call somebody like Don Cruz and go, what am I supposed to do? A couple weeks ago, Brandon and I were putting up a backsplash at the house, and we were very meticulous, very careful. It took us a solid 79 hours. We just spread it out over a few days. And I was going to put the faceplates back on, and after I find a diamond drill bit and find where the screw's supposed to go, we'll all be okay. None of you have ever done that before. My brother-in-law's he's an electrician, and he said you go into new houses all the time. He said the people that do the tile don't care about the electricians, and I care about both now. So now we need do-overs in life, but really when it comes to just life in general, instead of really a do-over, we need a fresh start. All of us need a fresh start at some point. I think a fresh start can mean a couple different things. For some, a fresh start can imply almost a renewal, like a picking up where you left off. And for those who are following after Jesus, sometimes we go through seasons of renewal. But really when it comes to a fresh start implies starting for the first time. And when God sent his son Jesus to suffer the cross and to conquer the grave, he provided the opportunity for a fresh start for everybody. This morning, this is what I want to do. I want us to lean into this idea of a fresh start by looking at some individuals that were kind of closely related to the crucifixion of Jesus and what it has to do with a fresh start for them. I'm going to kind of be all over the place this morning. There's a lot of text. But if you want to kind of try to follow along, we're going to start out in Matthew chapter 26. We're going to be in Matthew 26 and 27 quite a bit. So if you have a Bible, and I hope that you do, you can kind of turn there. If you want to go and get prepared, I think like at the end we're going to kind of dip into Luke 23. I forgot to say that in the first service. So if you want to go and mark that one, that's fine. Otherwise, you just kind of listen along. I want to kind of tell the story of a few individuals that were connected with the crucifixion of Jesus and kind of lean into their need for a fresh start. And then at the end, as we kind of walk through those characters, kind of see how those individuals might relate to us. And if I do a really bad job, we'll do a do-over, and I'll have to stay after class, and we'll do it one more time. Or I'll just do it around the dinner table at home. This morning I want to talk about a few individuals related to the crucifixion, and the first person I want to start out this morning is with a guy named Peter. Peter was a guy that followed after Jesus. If you've kind of been in church world a little bit, you might know that Peter is referred to as one of the 12 disciples. He was called by Jesus to follow after him. Peter's kind of one of those mainstays. He's always in the first three names mentioned. Peter, if you know the rest of the story, Peter did a lot for the good of the gospel in those early days after Jesus ascended into heaven. But Peter, as a follower of Jesus, when Jesus was on earth, he had this tendency to take out his sandal and shove it in his mouth because he suffered from sandal and mouth disease. Anybody suffer from that? Oh, thank you for the quick hands. We try to spin that in a positive way and say he might have been a verbal processor. I'm a verbal processor. I like to talk things out loud. It just sometimes gets me in trouble. I talk a lot of things out loud with Pastor Greg on Thursdays. We create problems, then on Mondays we come in and fix them. It's really a magical thing. Peter was a hard-charging kind of guy. Peter was the guy to where when Jesus kind of alluded to him having to go to the cross, him having to die, Peter piped up and said, no, you'll never die. We'll defend you to the death. And Jesus looked at Peter and said, get thee behind me, Satan. Peter was trying to stand in the place of God's plan. On the night before Jesus was arrested, or the night of Jesus' arrest, they had something that was called the Last Supper, where the disciples gathered around Jesus and they participated in communion together. And at some point during that conversation, Jesus looked at Peter and said, hey, before the rooster crows, you're going to deny me 3 times. And Peter said, absolutely not. There's no way I will do that. When they got out to the Garden of Gethsemane, when the mob did come to arrest Jesus, Peter jumps up and he pulls a sword out from his cloak and takes the ear off of the servant of the high priest. That was Peter. But after Jesus was arrested, Peter did find himself out in the courtyard outside the trial. In verse number 69, we see that a servant girl came up to him and said something like, hey, you also were with Jesus the Galilean, but Peter denied it. He said, no, I don't even know what you mean. And when he went to the entrance, another servant girl saw him, and she said to bystanders, this man was with Jesus of Nazareth, and he denied it with an oath. I do not know the man. A little while longer, a bystander came up to Peter and said, certainly you are too one of them, for your accent betrays you. You ever known someone whose accent betrayed them? My wife is from Mississippi. Notice, she's not from Mississippi. If you're from Mississippi, you're not from Mississippi, you're from Mississippi. Just kind of rolls right off. And if you live there, you need to learn how to say it the right way. Sometimes Brandy's accent betrays her. But it's always beautiful, and if you say otherwise, we can step outside and have a conversation. Now, even the way that Peter spoke, it's like, man, you've got to be connected to them. But he invoked a curse on himself and swore, I do not know the man, and immediately the rooster crowed. And Peter remembered the saying of Jesus, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times, and he went out and wept bitterly. Peter needed a fresh start. But he wasn't the only one who needed a fresh start. There was a guy that's closely tied to the crucifixion of Jesus by the name of Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate was the Roman prefect or governor of the area of Judea. His name is synonymous with contention that was taking place during that area, during that time. He wasn't the greatest governor. He was known for trying to suppress dissent. But we know him as the individual that Jesus was taken to, and it was Pilate that oversaw kind of the trial and the decision that would come about when it came to Jesus. He didn't choose to be in that situation, but that situation came to him. And what's interesting is when we see the interaction between Pilate and Jesus, you can see kind of an inner turmoil that's taken place because he knows that something just isn't right. Something's off. He didn't see anything wrong with Jesus. But instead of taking a hard stand, he kind of tried to take the easy way out. See, it was kind of customary during that time to where you could you could put two individuals in front of a crowd, both condemned individuals, and give the crowd the opportunity to set one free or not. And so Pilate dips into the prison and finds a vile individual by the name of Barabbas. And he puts that individual in front of the crowd, and he asks them in Matthew chapter 27, whom do you want me to release for you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called the Christ? And I don't know exactly what was going through Pilate's mind at that time, but I wonder if he was like, hey, here's my way out of this. I don't have to set Jesus free. Surely they won't choose Barabbas, but they chose Barabbas. The people said, give us Barabbas. And then Pilate asked the crowd, then what shall I do with Jesus who is called the Christ? And they said, let him be crucified. And here's where the inner turmoil kind of exists, because Pilate said, why? What evil has he done? And they would hear none of it. They said, crucify him. And so here's what Pilate does. He says, hey, bring for me a basin of water. Let me wash my hands. And he tells the crowd this, I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourself. Here's the problem with what Pilate did. He thought that he could physically make it to where he was not guilty of this man's blood. But here's the problem. You can't forgive your own sin. Pilate thought that he could. He tried to wash his hands clean of the situation. Pilate needed a fresh start. You know, when we look at the crucifixion, if Jesus is the hero, there's a name that pops into many of our minds when we think of the villain. If Jesus is the hero, then who's the villain? Judas is the villain. Judas is the guy who walked with Jesus, who was called by Jesus to be one of his disciples. But there was always something wrong with Judas. You see, Judas was a manipulator. He was a conniver. He was a thief. He oversaw the money that was taken to take care of those who were in need, but he was constantly dipping into that fund for his own personal gain. Judas is the one, even though Jesus went to the cross because of it was God's plan, Judas was the human element that got the ball rolling. In Matthew chapter 26, verse 14, it says, then one of the 12, whose name was Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, what will you give me if I deliver him over to you? And they paid him 30 pieces of silver, and from that moment he sought an opportunity to betray him. He was just looking for his chance. See, it was Judas that led the mob to the Garden of Gethsemane to arrest Jesus. It was Judas who just before that had been at the Last Supper with Jesus and the disciples, whom Jesus had looked at and said, hey, you're the one who's going to betray me. Judas knew that Jesus knew. It was Judas who walked up to Jesus with the mob walking behind him as Judas had told the mob, hey, the guy who I kissed, that's the guy you're supposed to arrest. Judas walks up to Jesus, calls him rabbi, kisses him on the cheek, and Jesus is taken into custody. Jesus is then put on trial and then is condemned to die. And it's in that moment that Judas finds himself overwhelmed and having to deal with his own guilt. In Matthew 27, verse 3, it says that when Judas, his betrayer, saw that Jesus was condemned, he changed his mind and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders, saying, I have sinned by betraying innocent blood. They said, what is that to us? See to it yourself. And throwing down the pieces of silver in the temple, he departed, he went, and he hanged himself. Judas needed a fresh start, but Judas never got a fresh start. two final individuals that I want to lean into. And they're closely tied to one another. See, when Jesus was taken to the place of the skull, to Golgotha, to be executed, to be crucified, there were two individuals that were crucified with him. One on his left and one on his right. We'll call them criminal 1 and criminal 2. I thought it'd be wrong to give them names because somebody's name would just hurt their feelings. Criminal 1 was a vile individual. It says in Luke chapter 23 that one of the criminals who were hanged railed at him, saying, "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us." He was almost mocking Jesus, but doing so in a way for his own personal benefit. Hey, if you are in fact the Christ, why don't you save yourself? And while you're at it, why don't you save me? Evil, vile, angry, deserving of death. That was criminal number 1. Criminal number 2 was equally deserving of death, but his interaction was drastically different. Because he rebuked the other one, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed justly." Man, I love that statement. He's saying, we deserve this. For we are receiving the due reward of our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong. Criminal 1 says, hey, listen, save yourself and save us. Criminal number 2 says, no, don't save us. You deserve to be saved. And he looks over at Jesus, and he doesn't plead for his life. He just pleads for Jesus to remember him. And he says, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. They both needed a fresh start, but they were running out of time. See, we look at these 5 individuals, and there are many others that are closely tied to the crucifixion, but when we look at these individuals, I believe that for many of us, we can associate with one of those. Now, I'll be perfectly honest. When it comes to criminal number 1, I would have kind of a hard time believing there's criminal number 1 here this morning. But if you're criminal number 1, we are happy to have you. And we would love to talk to you about what it means to follow Jesus. I mean, criminal number 1 is vile, is hateful toward God. You hate the world. You've convinced yourself that God owes you what you want, but you've missed this. The very thing that you want is a temporary thing. You need something more than that. If you're here this morning against your own will, you just want to be done with God, can I implore you to turn to Jesus because you need a fresh start today. Could possibly be that someone here this morning, you relate with Pontius Pilate. You find yourself forced into a situation where you have to consider Jesus. That's where Pilate found himself. He wasn't looking for Jesus. Jesus was brought to him. And it could be you're here this morning because you maybe occasionally dip into spiritual things. Maybe you found yourself in a dark season and this morning you woke up and said, today is Easter, I need to be in church. But you might be here just thinking that, man, if I could just check a block, then I'll be fine. You're not sold on the fact that Jesus actually has something for you. You don't want to be blamed for anything. You want to move past your own guilt, and you're willing to do whatever it takes to move past your own guilt. Pontius Pilate washed his hands in the water thinking that was making him innocent of that man's blood, when in reality, all are condemned because all of us are guilty. And you need to understand this morning that there is nothing you can do on your own to make yourself innocent. You need a fresh start. You need Jesus. And by everything that we know, just like criminal number 1 who died apart from Christ, Pontius Pilate never gave his life to Christ. I think this morning when we consider the 5 individuals, Judas is probably the hardest one to lean into. None of us want to think of ourselves as Judas, but If we're to be perfectly honest, we've known people, or we've possibly been the person ourselves who has been in this religious thing for the perks. See, that's kind of what Judas was along for the ride. He enjoyed the nice things that came along with being part of Jesus' crew, but he was really always in it for himself. And I want you to know this morning that if you are in it for yourself today, if you are here for the perks, you will maybe receive some temporary blessings, but you will miss out on the greatest blessing of all. And I believe that there will come a day to where, and I pray for this, there will come a day to where you will find yourself under deep conviction. This is where you need to take a different route than Judas, though. See, when Judas found himself greatly convicted, overwhelmed with guilt, he took matters into his own hands to fix the guilt. And here's the truth of it all. You can't fix your own guilt. Only Jesus can fix your guilt. Judas ended his life and missed out on the fresh start of following after Jesus. That does not have to be you today. Could be you're sitting here this morning and you relate well to Peter. You're following after Jesus, but you've struggled and faltered when it comes to questions that got a little too difficult. Maybe you've even found yourself tied up in situations to where instead of staking the flag in the ground and saying, no, I'm following after Jesus, you found yourself in the midst of pressure, maybe even denying to know Jesus. And maybe not even denying him with your words, but denying him with your actions. You know, the beauty of Peter's story, instead of like Judas who went and hanged himself, Peter went and wept bitterly. He was overwhelmed with grief. 3 days later, word got out that Jesus might be alive. Peter and another guy named John run to the tomb to see with their own eyes that the tomb was empty. And a few days after that, Peter and Jesus have a meal together with others there, but they're with one another, and Jesus looks over at Peter and says, hey, Peter, I got a question for you. Do you love me? And Peter said, oh, I love you. 3 times Jesus asks Peter, hey, Peter, do you love me? 3 times Peter responds. The third time, getting his feelings hurt. Jesus, you know I love you. Just as Peter denied Jesus 3 times, Jesus forgave Peter. And Peter became a pillar in the early church, unashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ. He got his fresh start. He found his renewal in Jesus, and he used it to the max, to the point where history tells us Peter eventually would give his life for the sake of Christ, and when sentenced to execution by crucifixion, was crucified upside down rather than right side up. This morning, if you find yourself in a difficult season, as if you've kind of stepped away from the Lord, can I encourage you to step back and to find a fresh start in Jesus? Then there's that last person. Criminal number 2. Maybe that's who you relate for. I think we heard a couple of great testimonies this morning from our students going, man, how could God love me with what I've done? If you've never considered that question, I'm not sure you've looked deep enough. For none of us are deserving. See, the criminal number 2, you find yourself faced with a comparison. You're comparing yourself to the things that you have done, and you find yourself comparing themselves to a perfect God who's done nothing wrong. And you are lacking. Jesus didn't deserve the cross. You do. But you don't have to stay there. You see, this is what criminal number 2 did. Remember, he looked over at Jesus and said, Jesus, remember me. Remember me when you step into your kingdom. And Jesus responded and told him, today you will be with me in paradise. Run to Jesus. If you're sitting there going, man, I don't deserve Christ, that's a great place to be because none of us do. But here's the truth of the gospel. Even though you don't deserve Christ, you can still come to Christ and find freedom and forgiveness in Jesus. Run to Jesus. Who are you this morning? Are you angry and vile toward God? Do you think you can wash your hands and make yourself innocent? Are you just in it for the perks and you're going to find yourself in a place of guilt and condemnation that you might not be able to come back from? Maybe you've found yourself at a point of denial to where you have a difficult time being strong in what you say you believe. Perhaps you're here this morning saying, there's no way God can love me. The good news is for all 5 of those categories of people and whatever other category we haven't touched on this morning is that Jesus can give you a fresh start today. And I pray you'll lean into Jesus. Here in just a moment, we're going to have an opportunity to respond. Again, our praise team is going to come up and lead us in another song. And when we do so, and there are a couple different ways you can respond. We're going to invite people to stand, but when we do so, hey, if you need to grab somebody that's next to you and go, hey, you gave me a card to come to church with you, and now you brought me to church. I need you to talk to me about this. Man, y'all have that conversation right there. Maybe somebody needs to come down and maybe grab me by the hand, grab Brandy by the hand. I mean, we have a lot of faithful followers that are up here that would love to pray with you and love to talk through whatever God's doing in your heart this morning. But don't just leave here and get on with the rest of your day. Instead, lean into this moment and let Jesus move in your heart. But it's possible there's someone here this morning that you need to step into a relationship with Jesus, just like these 5 ladies have demonstrated this morning. And you need to declare today that I want to follow Jesus. I'd love to have that conversation with you as well. Please don't miss this moment to respond to Christ. I invite you to bow your heads and close your eyes as our praise team comes to lead us. Most gracious God, we find ourselves here in this place needing you. And Father, as we respond to you, God, the first thing that we should recognize at the beauty of this reminder that Jesus is alive is that none of us are too good for you. For no one's good but God. But God, the beauty of the gospel is that the other side is true, that none of us are too bad to where we can't be saved by your grace. Father, let us know this morning that it's not too late. But I pray we'll be reminded that time is running out. And we need to trust in you today. Father, may your Spirit fill this place as we